episode of the Red Chip Poker Podcast. I'm your host, James Splitsuit Sweeney, joined as always by Chris Warren. Chris, how you doing today?
I'm doing extra good today because I've had a nice long break and I'm super fresh.
Excellent. I love a good long break. I haven't had one in a while, but I have one coming up in a few months-ish, so very much looking forward to that. Until then, we're in the grindstone, and today I want to talk about the grindstone for a very specific kind of poker player and talk about beginners. Now, players that are new to poker just kind of tend to run the same kind of patterns a lot, especially when it comes to the strategic mistakes they might make, and just in general, the kind of things that beginners do are going to be very different than the players that have been playing for a long time, studying for a while. I kind of want to talk about that. So you haven't been a beginner for a very, very long time, neither have I, but do you remember what your beginner days as a poker player looked like? And maybe let's just start there.
Ooh, good question. Yeah, I mean, I think kind of what you're hinting at too is that it's really challenging, I think, at a certain point, I think for any type of advanced skill, for someone who's very far along the path to teach a beginner. So I like that idea of going back to what it was like. I remember, my beginnings were playing in home games, with my high school buddies essentially, and we didn't know much. And it was like 2003, a moneymaker had just happened. And, I would read TJ Cloutier's book and think about basics like playing tight and trying to memorize hand ranges from positions, but very, very rough. Nothing was precise. It was just ace king is a good hand. And, this is Jack 10 suited is a trash hand or something like that. Very, very broad strokes. What about you?
So I kind of similar. I played a couple times in high school around the same time, but really started playing more seriously in college. But in terms of when I was early on, I just remember not having strong rationale for the things I was doing, but just kind of having this innate feel for this feels right, this feels okay, this feels like a good spot. And it wasn't until I started really getting into the math part of it and actually studying hands out that I was like, well, that's just a complete nonsense thought process. In fact, I remember specifically one time probably playing a sit and go of some sort, and you were over my shoulder, and I forget what I did. It was something silly with pocket eights, though. I think I overbet jammed on a double barrel or something like that, and you were like, why are you doing that? And literally the words out of my mouth were, because it's fun. Now, I hope that there was a little bit more thought process to that, and it might be fun and also profitable, but I remember that the rationale was not all that strong in the very, very early days, and once I really started working, that's when I could see the game a bit more clearly, but up front, it was a little bit rough around the edges, to say the least.
Yeah, I do remember that you were very fun focused, I think, and for me, I remember so I ended up playing a lot of in high school, and then we were going to college at Syracuse, and I kind of dropped poker, and I was just well, that was just a fun thing I did in high school, and now my job is college, and I forget how, but James kind of had this poker tournament he would run with people or something like that, and he looped me in one night, and for me, I got hooked into that hyper competitive mode, and I'm pretty sure I won the little $5 tournament we played or something like that, or I got very close. And then they were telling me about Bodog and online poker that I had never played. And I was just hooked into the competitiveness. That was my whole thing. And I think my competitive instincts, I noticed I would just sit in these games, and instinctually I kind of figure out the strategy of bluffing and all that stuff, and I just seemed to be ahead of the curve a lot at the beginning, I remember.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree with that. And I'm sitting here trying to think about, okay, what a dumb comment for me to make. It's fun, but I realize as I'm trying to think through this, what was it like in the very, very early days of playing poker for me? And it was really just about aggression went a long way. I mean, aggression still goes a long way, but nowadays you definitely need some more refinement around raw aggression. But back then, that was, it's still fun to me. I still love being aggressive. I still love finding these little pressure points in people's strategies where they just absolutely crumble and taking advantage of that every step along the way. That to me is fun. And that's hopefully what I was taking advantage of in that silly pocket eight stand. Now, it took me a long time to start realizing profitable doesn't equal optimal. That took a while to sink in, and then obviously refinement around the strategy otherwise. But I found, you always talk about the competitive part, and I definitely have the same thing, but I also really love being able to be aggressive, being able to find situations I can take advantage of, and just really being able to out strategy people. Like that, I really, really enjoy. And I enjoy that a lot, especially in my late teens, early 20s. I absolutely loved that.
Yeah, I remember that actually. I in the early days, which is funny. Uh, you were definitely like the maniac, and I was the nit. Like my solution to everything was definitely be nitty, and just have the nuts, and I'm always gonna have it. And you were like, yeah, you wanted to outplay people, which is I think it's kind of flipped, right? That's a fair assessment now.
I wouldn't say that I'm as nitty, but I would definitely say that you have become way more refined in that. In fact, there's like kind of that inflection point where we had been playing and studying and playing and studying a lot. And then all of a sudden it was just very clear that like you were not the same nitty person anymore. And you had been putting in a lot of that time and effort to get rid of that part of your game. But that took a lot of time and effort. And for me, it was trying to rein that stuff in and not get too overboard. I
Hmm.
wouldn't say that I'm as nitty now as you were then. I don't think I can
No,
say that, but there's definitely a little bit more refinement for sure, rather than just like the endless aggression because I quote feel I can. I don't think the game even allows for that anymore, so that's had to get refined.
of course. Yeah, no, I don't. I don't think I would have ever described you as a nit. That's a good point. Um, I don't know, actually. I guess we haven't played enough to really say who would be the maniac now. But
Probably you. I mean,
yeah.
I take that back. I don't think anyone would describe either of us as that maniacal at this point.
Oh, there's plenty of Vegas regulars who would love to tell me that.
Yeah, and I get that here and there too, for sure. It's just I'm actually so I've played in games where there's like me and one other person who's like similar skill level,
Hmm.
and usually it's kind of this known environment kind of deal, like when I play with Doug or something, and play at the same table in Vegas. Then all of a sudden there's just this weird change where like we're both kind of keeping each other in check. Like we both kind of become the police, and then all of a sudden each other's play styles like don't fully come out, whereas it would if like that literally that one person was removed. I suspect that would happen if we were both in the same game, but I'm not for sure.
Hey, everyone. This is just a quick reminder. If you need help getting started in poker, figuring out what to do, what ranges to play, we have Core available. Core is the most structured poker course that you can get. Literally walks you through everything you need to know from the ground up, each concept, ranges, how all that works, how you need to think about that. Literally a step by step progression into making you essentially an expert poker player. And all that is available for just $5 to start, $5 a week after that. And yeah, I mean, it's what a beginner poker player would need, and we've spent the time to meticulously understand that. We have beginners who come in and ask questions, and we've integrated that, and those questions are available as well. So I think it's really the best thing that you could do to get started in poker. So if that sounds like the type of thing that you would like, please go to redchippoker.com/core. So I think for me that whole back and forth, my takeaway is that like when you start playing poker, you're gonna have some of your personal tendencies come out and be influencing like why you play and how you think about it. And I think that's probably universal. I've seen that in almost every person that I've worked with as a student or, gotten involved in their poker game in some way. And so as a beginner, one of the mistakes I think you're going to make is that any tendency that you have that deviates from what effective poker play is, that's a potential area of mistakes. That's where you're going to have to be the most careful, I would say.
Agreed. And I think this is partially you have to know yourself, right? If you don't know yourself even a little bit, we were just talking about this off mic before we started recording, like knowing yourself is incredibly, incredibly important. And if you don't, then the things you're going to start doing at the table when you're new to poker are just like you said, going to be these extensions of your personality traits. and quite often kind of shortcomings within your personality traits. It's very rare that like the best part of you comes out when you first begin in poker. Would you agree with that, or not so much?
I would just the most truth I think is exactly that. It's like people say like, oh, getting money doesn't make you a better person, right? It just shows you, it amplifies who you are. I think that's
Yep.
the saying. And I think poker is very similar in a way in that like how you deal with stress and intensity and loss and winning, right?
Yep.
All those things are going to be demonstrated to you pretty quickly as you get serious about playing poker, because you're going to experience all those things. You're going to get invested in what's happening in the money or whatever it is, even just the competition. And you can see probably the best and worst parts of yourself having that come out.
Very, very true. So when it comes to someone who's kind of like newer to poker, if you had to like lay out a which side of the spectrum you think they're going to be more on? Do you think they're going to be more on the plays too many hands, a little bit too fishy, a little bit too aggro, play too many hands but too passive, play too few hands? Kind of where do you think most beginner players tend to fall?
There's probably two categories, but I mean, overwhelmingly, we know the data says people play too many hands. That's why poker is kind of profitable, or no limit hold'em specifically is too profitable. It's just people are playing too many hands, and you just, especially if you don't have the post flop skills to take advantage of someone else. I mean, playing another hand is just another opportunity for you to lose. So we just know that's the case. And then on the flip side, taking someone who maybe had the more natural instinct that I did, just like always play, always have the nuts, you'll probably in 2020 absolutely end up playing too tight. So you probably have to have a little awareness, but chances are you play too many hands. And then if you don't play too many hands, chances are you're way too tight.
I can 100% agree with that. Especially the other side of the spectrum is you are playing way too nitty. And I think for those players it's tough because I think it's tougher to identify what is too tight. And it's very easy when you're playing tight in this game to say, I'm not losing any big pots. I'm not getting into too many confusing spots. So, like, they almost don't feel incentivized to start adding extra hands into their preflop range. And then years and years go by and the game continues to ebb and flow, and they're just kind of like stagnating for a very, very long time. At what point can someone start to kind of discern that they're playing way too tight, and what could they do kind of right off the bat of that?
And it's funny too, actually, I think a lot of people will probably vacillate between these two categories. To start, you just play and you guess your way through, and no one would think probably to play as tight as, say a basic beginner strategy would be for like a very beginner poker player. And then maybe they get some advice, maybe they go online, and then they might switch and say, okay, now I'm only going to do what I know. And then they end up playing very, very tight, only play good hands. And that it's very easy to just end up in a place where it's like, okay, I don't know how to start adding things back in. And I think that's actually one of the most common mistakes, is that people will, watch high stakes games or Twitch or whatever, and they'll see people playing more hands and managing those situations, maybe doing well in them, and they're interested in those plays. And there's just no like respect for, I think, their current strategy. They just kind of want to just ditch their strategy and like, okay, I'm going to play like Phil Ivey now, or I'm going to play, they just mimic. And there's a very good instinct in there, right? Mimicking high stakes play is, how much of poker has progressed. However, many beginners will tell me basically it's like, oh, like I got a GTO chart and I watched this, or I saw this person's strategy, I read this person's book, and then all of a sudden they just take their entire game, they restructure it from the ground up, and they try and get back in there, and then all of a sudden they're just spewing money. Is that something that you've seen as well?
100%. Like pretty much that exact same oscillation from playing far too many hands, getting smacked for it, then backing into overly nitty play, not getting smacked as hard, then trying to mimic, and then getting right back to getting smacked again. And whenever it comes to mimicking, and you're 100% right, like a lot of poker has grown kind of as a byproduct of watching really, really high end players or players that are kind of cutting edge battle. right? A lot of the game has changed because of that, and oftentimes for the better. But the thing is when you're looking at that, one, understand where they're playing, who they're playing against. I think that's incredibly important. It goes overlooked a tremendous amount of the time. And then the other part of it is if you're going to start implementing somebody else's stuff into your game, do it little by little. Test pieces rather than think you're going to overhaul the entire engine. Switch out one piece first, see how it works. Then test out a little bit more, see how that works. And that will do far, far better than just trying to take what you're seeing in a high stakes match and then plant it right into your low stakes strategy. I think that is just an absolute, absolute recipe for disaster to think you're just going to be able to take the entire thing and somehow hope that you understand it based upon watching 40 some odd hands of somebody go to war. I don't think that's going to be a great idea in the long run.
And I think it's almost universal that everyone encounters that at some point. And maybe specifically the people who end up improving in the end, because that kind of balancing out of like, how do you improve and what do you take? And, it takes some experimentation. And if you don't do that, you're probably just you're just going to be the nit who never improves and always plays passive and didn't figure out those plays. So I don't think it's the end of the world if you catch yourself doing that, but it is so common, so universal, I would say, for people who think about the game to end up being like, oh, why did I get into this situation where I'm just like playing in a way that I don't understand?
Exactly. And that's like, even if we're going to take like the range example, right? You mentioned someone picking up a GTO chart and just kind of trashing their old range and just saying, okay, I'm going to stick purely to the chart. And maybe the chart is like twice as loose as they were playing before. Like, take pieces of the chart first. Throw in the entire cusp first. So, like, an extra 5 or 6 hands. And then see how that works into your strategy, both pre-flop and post-flop. And then if that's working well, you're feeling comfortable with it, then throw in another 6 combos, assuming that there's that many left. And just continue doing that rather than just, you've never played ace-5 suited from early position and now all of a sudden you're going to make that your default. Like, fine, maybe, but if you're not really confident post flop, that's going to get really, really troublesome for you.
Yeah, there's a lot of assumptions baked into playing those developed strategies like GTO and high stakes play, where it's like, first of all, you're getting on the variance train a lot of times when you start doing that for the first time. Even if you were to be playing optimally otherwise, it's like, are you ready to encounter the 5, 10, 20 buy and down swings that probably come along with playing more in that way? And most people probably won't be, and so they might freak out partway through. And also when you look at a GTO strategy, it's assuming that you're playing post flop perfectly, or at least better than your opponent. So those are razor thin hands, and not everyone's comfortable in every situation. It's like, I remember one technique I would use with students to loosen them up was like to give them a loose range on the button, but no other positions. Because playing on the button, it's going to be the easiest. It just is. You'll have the most information. You can check back. Your mistakes are less likely to be punished, so obviously. So I actually, and I do that for myself as well, is I tend to have like one area of focus per session where it's like, okay, I just want to avoid doing, 3-betting too frequently out of position, or 3-betting people who I want to apply a exploitative 3-bet range to the loose player or something like that. I will just do one thing per session. And I think that's a fantastic way to think about opening up your game, is just like open up one thing at a time. Like if you think about a more advanced strategy, like let's say adding in hands, and you're just going to add in some hands from the button for one session, and then the next session you add in some hands from the cutoff, like, in like 5-10 sessions, you're already like good to go. And it's been a much more stable thing where you've had a chance to kind of bail out and check yourself and think about things as they go. So I'm a big fan of that.
I really, really like that and 100% agree with it. And you said something that I just want to like smash on one more time and really make sure that people hear it, is playing all the extra hands pre-flop, if you attempt to do that, and not being confident post-flop, could leave you in a situation where you're bailing out a lot, right? Especially if you're going to try to like open up more hands from earlier middle position. And some of those combos are going to be ones that you have to be comfortable double barreling more, triple barreling more, and making check raises in spots that you're not really used to. And if you're not doing those things properly and you're just getting into a I raise preflop, I see bet, deer in headlights on the turn, then you're going to just be spewing in like the silliest way. And worse, you're not going to really understand it because it's not like a big loss, right? A big loss stings, and we remember that and we make sure we go home and study it. But a failed preflop raise and a failed c bet and a check quit on the turn, like you don't tend to remember that. So you don't go home and you don't study that spot and you don't learn from it and you continue making the same mistake until you eventually do something different, but it's going to take a long, long time. Versus, like you said, one thing at a time in terms of strategic changes or range changes, whatever, is going to do far, far better. Just do not think you're going to change the entire car out in an afternoon. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, no, I think that pretty much nails it. And I would say to me that even alludes to the next most common thing I see. And this is, just a universal poker truth is that, people get really invested in the short-term occurrences of what's happening, right? In fact, I think that's part of the fun of poker and the challenge of poker is that everything about the game is designed to get you invested in that one hand, that one decision, going all in, etc. That's a huge part of the fun. But the reality of the situation, and every single winning poker player knows this, is that the real poker is in the decisions, right? And I think the challenge as a beginner, specifically if you don't have like a math background or a statistics background, is just understanding, like maybe on an emotional level, how luck is going to make you feel and how it's going to change your decisions. It's, even as someone who I think is very inclined towards that, it's an enormous part of the game for me even today. So
it really is difficult. And I think that's just one of the tougher things about this game is the feedback you get from it isn't really always the best, right? You could play a hand horribly and win it. You could play a hand beautifully and perfectly and lose it. And when you don't have experience in this game, right? Newer players won't have that. It's going to be far, 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 far too difficult for them to discern what is what. Is this a luck situation? Was this a bad decision? Was this a great decision that just didn't pan out for me? And it's just one of the tougher things in this game to focus on, but you have to. And then, like you said, the other part is the emotional part of luck. And doing good things and running bad is very, very difficult for people. But if you can focus on the decision, just making better decisions. When you're a beginner, no one's expecting you to play perfectly. This is something I've had to talk to my teenage son about a tremendous amount over the last couple of months. Is like no one's expecting perfection out of you, right? You are new to the game of life, right? He's pretty much almost an adult, getting there slowly but surely. You're new to that. No one's expecting you to play perfectly. Same thing when you're a new poker player. No one's expecting that. And don't expect it from yourself. Just expect to make better decisions. And if you make something that you deem as a mistake, go study it. If you make a decision, you're like, I played this perfectly 100%. Make sure to study that too, though, because you're not going to be able to know what's good and what's bad and what's ugly and what's meh until you go and put a little time and effort and exploration into these kinds of things.
Yeah, it's such a challenging thing when you don't have like the sample size and that type of thing, where it's like you and I can probably remember, well, maybe not off the top of our head, but we've been in situations where we've triple barreled off or made some loose feeling bluff where you have a terrible hand or you're pretending you have a huge hand or whatever it is. And just know, like, yeah, like it works out, the 50% of the time or the 70% of the time or whatever you do it with. But that means I'm getting called 3 out of 10 times or I'm getting called 4 out of 10 times. And it's going to feel terrible when I have nothing. And, I'm sitting across from the table from the dude who's giggling at me now because he snapped me off. And, just understanding that emotionally is going to be nearly impossible if you don't have that experience. And so, a huge amount of your early poker career, like you kind of said with your son, is kind of just getting that experience in an imperfect way. And the one thing I notice the most is that the people who end up talking about their luck a lot, who, you know, want to tell you the bad beat story, they want to, just get really emotionally invested in it, I think they have the most trouble separating the decisions from the luck, from the variance. And so, as much as possible, I try and never think in those terms of like, oh, is it going well? Is it going poorly? It's just always about the decision as much as you can. And I think everyone will probably think about their luck, at least on some level. But the more you can just like not allow yourself almost to even consider that aspect of it, I think the faster you improve, the more your entire subconscious gets kind of focused on the right thing.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. And as someone who is really, really guilty, especially in earlier days, of being very, very focused on how am I running, what's my luck looking like. I mean, I remember getting database analysis done with someone who's very, very good at database stuff just so I could proof out how bad I was running. Like that was very, very important to me to have some like objective measurement
Yeah,
of like I am running badly. And
I remember.
after I did that, I actually felt better. And then I just said, okay, well, I can't control this. This is running bad over a very large sample size. So nut up and let's get back to work and control the things we can control. It does suck, but by the same token, if you can stay really focused on the decisions you're making and remember those things rather than the luck part, the luck, it sorts itself out in the long run. Don't panic about it as much as you possibly can. It's why we use a bankroll. So that way, if we have one bankroll to our name and we go play and get it all in with a 98% edge and happen to lose that 2%, that sucks. You're out of the game. But we don't do that, right? We play with a bankroll. We play with money that we can afford to lose. And when we get in there and do things, we just focus on making the good decisions. If we're not sure if they're good decisions, we go home and proof it later. That was a big, big change for me, is just being as focused as possible on what decisions am I making? Am I making appropriate decisions? Not am I hitting my flush draws? Am I missing this? Am I running into coolers here? It helped a tremendous amount, but it does take a lot of effort. For me, it was probably like a good solid year of really trying to retool the way that my brain processes information. And I'm not a hyper emotional person. So I can only imagine how
Hmm.
difficult it would be for someone who is very emotional. It might be very hard for you. Just note that this is something that is going to take a lot of work, but be very, very worthwhile. Not just if you're going to be in poker for a long time, but just in life. It really is.
Yeah, it's interesting. Actually, we were such a good contrast back in the day, I remember, because I just don't think I ever got that invested in it. It definitely affected me, and it actually still does. Like, I'm still very aware of the winning and the losing, and because it's
Yep.
competitive, right? Um, but I just remember, like, I never thought about my luck that much. I always wanted to like play you heads up or talk about this or that, and I would notice patterns actually, just that when you and I would be like really into something like that, both of us would seem to do well. And when there was more like talk about luck or variance or something like that, results would decline. So it's just one of those things. I think it's so challenging for everyone. I can tell you from talking to, I've talked to Elliot Rowe a good amount, who works with a lot of the high stakes players and things like that. And from what I can tell, basically the entire high stakes game is just about discipline, right? Because everyone kind of knows the things. They have access to the best coaches, the best knowledge, the best information. So it's just all performance at that point when good players are playing each other. And so yeah, I mean, just be aware that even you going into your 1-2 game, it may not seem like a battle of the titans, but really like just the mechanics of the game are frustrating, and they test your human emotions. And I think this will be a focus for your entire poker career. But as a beginner, one of the main things you can do is just like not let yourself get caught up in it. Don't wander down that path when you don't have to.
Yep. 100% agree with that. Well, I think talking about luck a little bit, at least my advice tends to always be, focus on the decisions and then go study. So I think studying is something that is important to talk about for beginner poker players. I think everyone needs to study more. The more serious you are, the more you should be studying. But talk a little bit about study for you when you were starting out? Like, what did study? When did study kind of start creeping in, and why, and what did it look like back then, if you can remember?
When did studies start creeping in? Well, I think I was immediately drawn to just like learning about the game. So, I was over a friend's house and, the old $5, $10 buy-in poker game fired up. And I think immediately after that, I was like, I want to watch the 2003, World Series of Poker or something like that. It was very, very quick. And then just like, I was just trying to absorb like everything that was happening and like how they were talking about the hand strengths and, you know, when they were post flop, like how they were thinking about, the strengths of hand. And I was just immediately invested in all of that. And then I remember after that, I quickly got like a TG Cludio book. I think that was one of my first. And even that, like, I don't think anyone would say that book was a bastion of poker knowledge compared to what we're doing now. But even that was like, it was just getting me in the mentality of learning and trying to be better and having a plan. And I think that's just a huge part of studying, is that even if you don't know all the best stuff, even if you don't know exactly what you should be doing, and you get lost or something's going wrong in your study, having that kind of confidence built from taking some time to look at and look at what's out there, think about what you're doing. It's just so powerful. It's so powerful. It'll give you the confidence. It starts giving you like experience that you didn't have to earn yourself. And, I attribute that to my being a professional poker player, no doubt.
Totally fair. Yeah, my study early on was a couple of books, although I was a goofball and ended up buying a limit book written by Miller that I tried to apply broadly at no limit. I did not understand in the very, very, very beginning.
I did the
Yeah,
same thing.
yeah. What are you gonna do? No one explained it early on. So nowadays you don't have necessarily the same excuse, but early on I'll claim that we did.
But that's like a great example. Like, how silly is that mistake in modern context, that like you're literally trying to memorize the wrong game? But just even the mentality of like seeking that out and trying to put the, knowledge together got you to a point where you're like, oh, okay, this doesn't actually
Yeah,
apply.
exactly. And then I think it was that book, and then I think it was probably an early Sklansky book, and starting to get more mathematically oriented uh, through reading both of them, but especially Sklansky was extremely, extremely helpful. And then it just kind of set me off from doing hand history exploration. And then, I mean, pretty much all through college, that's all we did, right? We either were playing or we were breaking down a hand. And
Yep.
even when we were partying, it was still not uncommon for us to just like say, hey, this is a spot I got into earlier today. And then we just start hacking through it. And I loved those. Love those sessions. I still love
Yeah.
those sessions. I mean, honestly, it was not uncommon for us to literally spend 2 or 3 hours working through a single hand and just really
Yep.
tacking through, like, okay, what about this and what about that, and trying to break it from a whole bunch of different angles. That was really, really helpful. And it was helpful with a group for sure. And, when we were in college, I know we started posting on 2 plus 2 a lot, and that was very, very helpful. But I found it better when it was people that I knew and trusted a little bit more. And I also knew were working on their game. But nowadays, so many different forums and discords and groups everywhere on the internet, and it's very easy to see who's studying and working on their game and who's not, and whose advice is more worthwhile and whose isn't. And I really think that if you're not doing that yet, getting comfortable doing that is extremely important. And it's also, in my opinion, going to help with the luck part, because I think the luck part really kind of can get tied in with the ego. And if you're not able to share a hand history and get absolutely slaughtered for every stupid thought you had during the hand, every bad decision you made, everything you're missing, if you're not willing to get slaughtered, your ego's still there. And once you can get your ego out of the way and you can look at everything more objectively, you're not really focused on the ego stuff or the luck stuff. You're just focused on the decisions, the objective things you need to be focusing on, the improvement, not getting lost in the minutiae of stuff that just does not matter in the slightest.
Yeah, I very much agree. It's having a community. I mean, this is like kind of like a well-known business meme. I think it's just like, the people that you surround yourself, right, are the people that you're going to naturally gravitate towards their lifestyles. So if you surround yourself with like poker players who are thinking about trying to get better and that type of thing, like there's a huge amount of just sort of natural gravity that will pull you in that direction. And yeah, we saw that. That was so common in the early days. Would be like, maybe people don't remember, but like Durr and Phil Galfond were roommates, I think, or something like they were like close friends, and they just were around each other all the time and talking about strategy all the time. And you can see the results, right? Like they developed a lot of the strategies that pushed poker kind of out of that original tight 2003 meta where people didn't really know how to play.
Yep.
Right. Like it was just like the good players played tight. That was
Yep.
it. And yeah, I think just being around people, like you said, like having someone who is willing to spend 2 to 3 hours talking about the minutia of one situation almost certainly propelled you and I to be like, oh, I'm doing something reasonable. I'm doing something meaningful. Like he's having success, so maybe even if it wasn't going well for me that month, it's like, well, okay, James is still doing well. And yeah, I am on a good track, and this is something I think is worth spending my time on. And it's very powerful, just being around people and having community. And that's one of the things that I think we think a lot about with Red Chip is just, we have a Red Chip poker group that you can join if you want to ask questions. We're working on getting a Discord set up, I think probably pretty soon, maybe around the time this podcast is up. So look out for that. But, I'm in your Discord every day, talking, answering questions, helping people be part of that, improvement community. So I think it's such a powerful thing. And I keep actively investing it to this day.
Yep. And I think it's such a strange thing because poker is such a lone wolf game, right? You can only make your own decisions at the table. No one else can make them for you. But by the same token, working with each other between sessions to really hack through hands and hack through strategy and make sure you're on the same page with concepts is extremely helpful. And, I'd say that even as a massive introvert, there's massive benefit to it. So even if you're not super confident and you're not the most social person in the world, like you can still get a tremendous amount of benefit from it. So don't shy away from it just because you're a little more standoffish and a little more introvert. Like there's plenty of groups out there that are more than willing to have you as long as you're willing to work hard and you're willing to share and you're willing not to just take everything personally. I think that's one of the tougher things with a game like this is a lot of players who get very luck and ego oriented take everything personally, and it's not really the best way to handle this game, not in the slightest, whether it's social stuff between sessions or at the table or on your own between sessions. You don't want to be taking this game personally. It's just not meant for that.
I agree. And along those lines, I think this is something that I see almost everyone doing poorly in poker, including some very good players. And that's they don't plan for the worst. And this is, poker is a weird thing because it's like, if you think about the amounts of money that you're gambling, like it's one of those situations that it's just creating such an enormous amount of risk. Even just like, oh, like I'm bringing $500 to the casino or something, for the games I play, and a couple $1,000s to the casino, right? Like that is a lot of risk to have that amount of money in your pocket and to be thinking about that type of thing. Poker players often get caught up in, loaning out money to people who don't pay them back. I saw that so frequently throughout the sort of early poker years of my professional career. It's just my friends, losing tens of thousands of dollars in loans for seemingly no reason. And yeah, I mean, just like, number one, just having a basic plan for improving and getting better. But number two, just like understanding some of the things that are going to go wrong, like, what a downswing will look like. What happens when, you start losing 3 buy-ins, 5 buy-ins? Like, how are you going to react emotionally? Do you know? Planning for bad things that can very plausibly happen in poker is something that I see almost no one do. I almost suspect there's like a aspect of poker players that just like ignores downside risk, and that's part of what draws them to poker. I don't know. What do you think about that theory?
100%. I mean, I can't tell you how many people you say how's the year been or how have things been going recently? And they say, about break even. Like as soon as someone says about break even, like 99% of the time, like, oh man, you are just hosed in the red, aren't you? Like you are nowhere freaking close to break even, my guy. And sometimes the people that are honest when they say that, and most are not, because I think exactly what you just said is how they think about it. The loss is just about break even, but all the wins are the things that get processed and remembered in the brain. It's like the weirdest level of just lying to yourself. And
Mm.
again, I hate to keep bringing up that nasty three-letter word, but ego is a hell of a drug, and you really have to get that under wraps and very quickly understand what is ego and what is not for you. And I think planning for the worst is a very, very good thing to do. Having stop losses, I think, is probably one of the easiest places to start, just to make sure that things don't get away from you. And if you ever blow through a stop loss, like what you just learned about yourself right there is paid for many, many times over by what the hell you blew through. But setting stop losses, I think, is incredibly important, and having the discipline to stick to them is incredibly important.
Yeah, and I for me, I always was just like, I think I'm pretty good about like not getting out of control and like letting winning and losing affect my decisions. But even me, I just said to myself, well, okay, I'm playing professionally. Um, you know, I'm going to be a professional about it. And so I think I just tentatively had like a three buy-in stop. I actually remember I got it from Ivy. Ivy was just like, yeah, I just tend to stop playing if I've lost three buy-ins or something like that. I was like, shit, it's good enough for Ivy. It's good enough for me. And I'm not sure, and there's games where that wouldn't work that well, et cetera. But like for the type of stuff I was doing, I was even playing heads up. It was a very powerful thing. And I did occasionally ignore it when I felt it was really, really justified. But I would say 99% of the time, it was like my, session stop loss it was actually probably closer to two. It was like if I lost two buy-ins and like wasn't feeling fantastic, I would just end the session. And I almost always ended it, going over three buy-in loss. And if I lost 10 buy-ins at any point, or maybe it was like between 5 and 10, I would always take a day off after that and just kind of cut that reset, freshen the brain up. And, like again, I know that I broke it several times intentionally, where I was just like, okay, this is such a good opportunity. And like, I'm fine. Like there's no, mental issues. Like I'm going to intentionally break it here on purpose. And I don't think I ever actually broke it like emotionally, which is just pretty good discipline. But yeah, I was able to make a living doing that. So, like any of your justifications for needing to go past your stop loss or have big losses and things like that, it's all relative to the game you're playing. If you're playing PLO, like I understand you may not want to have three buy-in stop loss, but, you know, relative to the game that you're playing and figuring out a reasonable point of like, okay, like if I'm not feeling fantastic and the game isn't great, or if I'm not even capable of assessing these things when I'm losing, like just have that plan in place and just write it down, commit to it, tell your buddy, whatever it is, create some accountability around it, and yeah, like create some of those plans and stick to it.
I think accountability is a big one, especially if you're not really able to do this on your own yet. And I like the litmus test that I think you just laid out, and I'm not sure if you even did it intentionally. But if you're in a state where you're like, I think I'm going to blow through my stop loss, I'm going to work past it, and I'm willing to go through, say, my 3 or my 5 buy-in stop loss, whatever it is. If you can't say that there's someone at the table better than you, and maybe that's true, but maybe you can't say this. There's someone at the table who's better than this spot than me. Like, if you can't get to that level of granularity and say that someone is better than you at something, it's probably a pretty good litmus test that you're on the ego side of things, and definitely should not blow through your stop loss. You should get really, really rigid in that point. And I've used those kind of things for myself in terms of really trying to instill discipline. I mean, I actually used to set where if I was going to go play live, I would force myself for the first half hour to buy in for like 50 big blinds. Just because, and it
Mm.
wasn't a bankroll thing, it was strictly a thing of I need to instill more discipline, and I have to have a lot of discipline at 50 big blinds. Whereas at 100, I can, do whatever the heck I want, or not whatever the heck I want, but I can do a little bit more fun stuff. So it was kind of one of those, do that, and also then within that half hour, suss out how good or bad this table is. If it's bad, then move on to another table. If it's good, then you can reload if need be. And I had to set these like stupid little games for myself in order to, one, instill discipline, and then two, ensure that I'm actually hitting it. And I think I only did that for maybe like 6 months. But I thought it was very, very important for me to make sure that I had a pure handle on everything that I was doing. I think that's kind of when I first moved out to Vegas, and I was coming off of online, and I wanted to make sure that live didn't get away from me, just because it's really easy for online players to have a massive ego thing against live players. I was like, I can't fall into that same trap. So I had to set these stupid little games to play with myself. But it helps in the long run, and having discipline, I think, is one of the most important things you can have nowadays. So it's worthwhile, especially if it's not necessarily your strongest suit right this moment.
Yeah, and I'm gonna extend this to one of the ones that I think dings so many beginning players I see, and even good players, honestly, is just moving up too quickly. Because I think the assumption always is like you're doing really well at your current stake, you're looking at the higher game, you're thinking about what twice the win rate would be, and you don't have the thought, what happens when I lose three buy-ins at the higher stake and it's double the loss? And how is that going to make me feel? What happens if the strategies they're using are different, or something I'm doing was dependent on, knowing the game I'm in? Um, I personally always had a approach that served me well, where I would do a tester session, sometimes even like play 20 hands, at the higher limit. It's worked better online than live, but like play just a little bit at the higher limit and then bounce out. Live, actually, I've done this where like I've gone into the big game and then also been on the list for the small game and then just like left as soon as the seat opened up in the smaller game. That was a fun little way to get it. So, you might play a hand every once in a while and you just acclimatize and you start to get data on how, the other strategies are playing and get a feel maybe for how your strategy is panning out. But so many players get hit really hard in that first short period of trying to move up, and it's an expensive one, and it's frustrating, it's emotional, people quit after things like that. So yeah, I mean, that's probably one of my number one mistakes I see.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I'll kind of throw one thing in here, and I'm not sure if anyone's still listening to this that's not necessarily more on the beginner side of the spectrum, but if they are, you have to remember that, let's just say you were a beginner and then you put in the time, put in the effort, and then you became pretty darn good at your current limit, no longer in beginner mode. When you move up, you might have to mentally readjust that you're now a beginner. You're a beginner at that game, you're a
Mm-hmm.
beginner to those dynamics, you're a beginner to what's going on there, you're a beginner to handling the money that's being handled at that limit. And just be careful with yourself, but also go through this exact same list. Stop losses, good. Studying, good. Not focusing on luck, good. Staying really focused on the decisions you're making, good. Get back to that whenever you get lost and whenever you try moving up into unknown territory or try to learn a new game or try to switch over from cash to tournaments or whatever. Just be careful with yourself. Understand that you're kind of at beginner status again, and do the same thing you would do or what you did when you were a beginner. Just be easy with yourself, but get back to studying, get back to working. And I think staying away from moving up too quickly and too aggressively is a good thing. I like aggressive shot taking, but if you're still classifying yourself in kind of beginner land, I don't think you're anywhere near having the conversation of moving up. And you see this a lot from people that have a lot of actual money, right? So maybe they're a beginner to poker, start playing 1-2 just because it's the smallest game. They can definitely afford to play 5-10, but they started lower. Good decision. And then they're like, well, okay, I've played a few sessions of 1-2. I'm just going to go to 5-10 where I can afford it. Maybe not necessarily the best decision in the world. Maybe there's halfway steps like 2-5, or maybe putting more time in at 1-2 is going to be better. Just be very, very careful. If you even momentarily still consider yourself a beginner, I think moving up is probably not something you want to prioritize right this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's there's this great business principle. I forget exactly what it is, but it's like essentially people get promoted beyond their level of competence. And I see this as kind of like a deeply ingrained human instinct, is that you kind of have to see how far you can go. It's just part of our instincts. If something's going well, our dopamine pushes us to kind of like go further, go further, go further. So understanding that like there's a deep tendency in everyone to try and go find a poker player in a poker game that they will be a loser in, even if you're winning at all the games that you've tried so far. So just be aware of that. And, having any win rate is better than losing in my opinion, and certainly can be worth getting some data. But like, if you're just getting data on how the other game plays, treat it as such and try not to make it too expensive.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, it doesn't need to be sitting there playing 30 hours a week in that upper game. You could just play an hour here, an hour there, half hour here, half hour there, and get some data, get some information, get some spots to go study. And then eventually you'll get out of beginner status and get back where you need and want to be. But for the moment, study a lot, be careful with where you're playing and how, and you get there when you get there. Just don't stress yourself. Remember, perfection is not the goal. Making good decisions, that's the goal.
Indeed.
Excellent. Well, this was an excellent conversation, Chris. You have any last minute things to add for beginner poker players?
No, I think we really covered it.
I think so.
I think everything I see most people do.
Agreed. I was a little nervous that this was going to be a shorter episode. I'm like, there's always so many things, but no, that's not true. There are so many different things that beginner poker players can do. And again, just to reiterate, like, a lot of these are mistakes that we've made before, either ourselves or people that we've been around. So if you're currently making any of these mistakes, don't beat yourself up for it. Just put in the time, put in the effort, and it'll all work out in the long run. But if nothing else, join a community. You're more than welcome over on Red Chip Poker, and we'll get you where you need to be going. Just make sure to stay disciplined, stay focused, and shed that ego as much as humanly possible. As always, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you back soon with a brand new episode. In the meantime, good luck out there, and happy grinding.
And guys, before you head out, just a quick reminder, if you want our beginner poker course, it's redchippoker.com/core. $5 to start. You can basically get everything you need for that $5 if you hustle that week. Otherwise, just take your pace, and it's only $5 a week. So check it out, redchippoker.com/core.